Financial markets are all about education and experience. Talking to industry professionals can therefore enrich everyone's journey to become financially literate, which is one of the core goals of Investro. Hello and welcome to another Investro podcast. Today's topic is from proof of work to proof of walk, and that will make more sense as we go into the end of the show. We are speaking to Rivers from BitcoinWalk. He's here to tell us about all things Bitcoin related and also the new initiative they have running alongside it as well. Rivers, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
First thing I'd like to ask really, could you just introduce yourself a little bit and maybe just tell us what led you into Bitcoin?
Yeah, absolutely. So I go by Rivers. That's how you can find me on Twitter or Telegram. I am the founder of BitcoinWalk, and I'm also working as an agile coach and Scrum Master in a DeFi protocol called Sovereign. That's the protocol built on top of Bitcoin, which allows you to take a loan against your Bitcoin as a collateral, which is non-custodial. And which has a 0% interest, so quite an interesting proposition. So what's how I got here, and what brings me to Bitcoin is generally a fascination around any system transformation. As a Scrum Master and Agile coach, I work with teams, with development teams. On one hand, and then on the other hand with the business side, with product owners and the business to basically deliver what the business wants to do. So on one hand, I've got people who are very business focused. On the other hand, I got teams of that are technical, and I'm the guy in between who makes sure nobody kills each other and we get stuff done.
I get it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, as an agile coach and Scrum Master, my role is to make sure that, we continuously deliver software, that we build software that is being improved, that's being iterated, that, we adjust to the new technology, new market reality, and latest security requirements. So, what I find specifically fascinating about doing that in the Bitcoin space is that Bitcoin is going to be revolutionizing a lot of sectors, and there's going to be a lot of ideas built on top of Bitcoin. So, anything with regards to smart contracts, with regards to micropayments, that's all available on Bitcoin already.
So I guess that's why you see it as an important. That's why you see Bitcoin as an important sort of element, is obviously all of it's sort of linked into your sort of work life anyway. Is there something that is specific that you think it's important in general to sort of the public, and from your own personal point of view as well? Where would you see the importance of Bitcoin?
Well, I would say that it's the first time that we actually have an alternative to the legacy financial systems, it's a tool that allows people to make transactions at any amounts with anybody in the world without excluding anyone, no matter what's which country you're in, no matter what religion you are in, no matter what's your gender. Bitcoin doesn't discriminate. It may sound like, okay, what does it mean? If that's what you think, try sending some money to people in Afghanistan from where you are now. It's not going to be easy. And actually, I got fascinated with the phenomenon and the transformation that we're getting into. For many reasons. First, I started, educating myself, learning more and more about the current financial system. I needed to understand it first, to understand its flaws, to embrace why Bitcoin was created in the first place, and to understand how it solves the problems that we have. It's been a fascinating journey for myself. I've done some readings, and I watched some tutorials, some talks. And when the deeper you go down the rabbit hole, the more you start to understand that it's inevitable, it's gonna happen, it's a matter of time. It's like the internet uh, in late 80s or early 90s. We are probably in 1991 in terms of the internet's adoption when it comes to Bitcoin, with the exception that when the internet was being adopted, there was no information about it to be found on the internet. So, this adoption was probably still quite slow. Whereas with Bitcoin, it is a financial instrument as well. So there are incentives to get on for those who are looking into this, from getting rich perspective. Um, but also the information technology is here. Like anybody can access information from anyone around the world, and that's the privilege that Bitcoin has that internet didn't have. Because it was first very exclusive to universities and academics, and today everybody, like literally everybody, is walking with an internet device in their pocket. So from this perspective, the access to information is much faster. Education is free. It's all available. There are plenty of resources online. And the next step that's going to be happening is just making people realize and adopting Bitcoin. So I very much support initiatives that are aiming to speed up the adoption, and I've started one initiative myself. It was actually a interesting uh, journey to get to where I am with BitcoinWalk, because basically I like walking, I like trekking, I like hiking. I like to go up to the mountains. I now live in Scotland, where we have plenty of places to go and roam. And when I was doing my usual walks, listening to some podcasts or audiobooks. And when I started listening things about Bitcoin, it just blew my mind. I was so overwhelmed with the potential it can bring, the creative potential it can bring to humanity, like all the solutions it can offer, that I was desperate to talk to someone about that. Yeah, it was my aha moment. And at this point, I decided to create a Bitcoin walk so I can talk to other people about that.
You certainly sound very passionate about it, and you're not the first person that's mentioning about going down the rabbit hole with learning about Bitcoin. And I really want to bring it back to basics, though, just for the benefits of some listeners who may not really know. Would you be able to give us a sort of description or define what actually is Bitcoin?
Sure, I'll give it a try. It's I'm sure it's been discussed by many people, but in the first place, Bitcoin is a network. It's a decentralized network of computers around the world that share the same ledger, the same encrypted database, if you like. And it's unstoppable, because you cannot, like, to stop it, you would need to turn off all those computers at once. And that's countries tried to do that. The most powerful countries in the world tried to do that, and they couldn't. So it's in this sense, it's a gift. It's a God sent from for humanity. So we have this censorship resistant, immutable ledger that lives out there, that is out there, that anyone can join, anyone can become a Bitcoin node operator. So if you want to set up your machine, it's pretty easy to do that. And what differentiates Bitcoin from the other crypto tokens is the fact that Bitcoin obviously is being mined. So you have miners who are mining Bitcoin, and that is the process of validating.
I really want to ask you, what is Bitcoin an investment asset, a savings asset, or a payment tool, or none of them, or all of them together? I mean, what actually defines it?
I think it's all together. I think anyone can look into this from different perspective, and I think the perspective changes depending where you are. If you go to Africa, where people are like unbanked and have no access to to any banking at all, or don't even have may not even have identity, but they have a mobile phone. This allows them to transact with anyone in the world without the need for KYC regulations, knowing a customer, without the need for having a bank or a debit card, without the need of having. I mean, they just need. They don't even need to have internet. They can do it via SMS in Africa, so that's super powerful. And for them, this is a way to trade. For them, Bitcoin is a way to exchange value, to buy things, to sell things. Um, Whereas in the northern hemisphere, generally speaking, Bitcoin is very much considered a speculative asset and store of value, something that is could be a hedge to inflation. So the use case is somewhat different, but in the end, both are right and both do their job. And Bitcoin with the layer 2 solution called Lightning Network, which allows almost instantaneous settlements on and off chain transactions. It's revolutionary because it allows you to send 1 penny or 1 cent to anyone else in the world. Try doing that with Visa or with MasterCard. It's going to be impossible.
That's a really good point, actually. And I did want to ask if have you used Bitcoin on your day-to-day life to make purchases? Is this something that is regularly happening for you, or is it things that you've noticed over time that you're using it more? Or
Yeah, we help to onboard different merchants to Bitcoin. I've been working quite closely with a UK based exchange, Bitcoin exchange called Coin Corner, who offer a whole package, for the merchants who can basically set up a merchant account, and anyone who's willing to pay in Bitcoin can go to a coffee shop or a store and use their Bitcoin to pay for any goods or services. The advantage to the merchant is that they can decide whether they want the settlement to be in pounds, in fiat currency, or in Bitcoin, if they want to keep the Bitcoin. So I think we've got a great opportunity for those merchants. I mean, they have a great opportunity to, especially in the services sector, to stack Sats, to get some Bitcoin for the services they provide, and just regulate their exposure to Bitcoin. If you want to, if for the job you're doing you want to be paid 10% in Bitcoin because you think it makes sense to save some money in Bitcoin for the future, but you need to be financially liquid and you need fiat money to pay the bills, pay the mortgage, whatever. Then you may want to say, okay, 10% in Bitcoin, 90% in normal in fiat money. And this makes it kind of nice and personal in terms of what you think about Bitcoin. My personal opinion is that I'm doing quite a lot to try to maximize my Bitcoin holdings. So I'm trying to work for Bitcoin. I'm trying to earn some Bitcoin, and I'm trying to spend some Bitcoin as well. So whenever we onboard any merchant, I make sure that the circular economy keeps going and keeps growing. So we've got a gourmet sausage roll stand that accepts Bitcoin in Edinburgh, and whenever we come back from a Bitcoin walk, we go like there's 20 people coming to buy a sausage roll and pay with Bitcoin, which is quite hilarious. But it's great it's a great way for the merchant because he increases his exposure to Bitcoin. He gets more sats in his wallet, and at the same time, right now it's still relatively small, so he doesn't have to cash out. He can wait for Bitcoin to grow up in value, and because Bitcoin is ultimately scarce, there's only ever going to be 21 million. With more people getting on board, with more institutions getting on board with Bitcoin, it's inevitable that the price of Bitcoin will go up. I don't like to talk about the price of Bitcoin because I don't think it's the most important thing in this beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's one thing I wanted to ask. I mean, obviously, people are spending it here and there, and obviously, you mentioned I like the idea that people are buying a sausage roll with their Bitcoin. It's kind of great. I'd also like to ask though: is the price volatility putting people off a little bit, and does that slow the progression of Bitcoin?
Well, yes, it is volatile. It's Bitcoin is roughly 14 years old, and I've got a conviction that by the time it matures to 18 years, it's not going to be, as volatile as other currencies. You can say is pound volatile? Well, yes. We had 18% inflation, so it devaluated by 18%. That's volatility. um, Bitcoin gets to the point where it's I think there was a period of like 6 months where Bitcoin was more stable or less volatile than British pounds. And those situations will keep on repeating. We are on the adoption path for Bitcoin to become the next global currency reserve. Currently, it's still the dollar, and it is going to be a dollar for another couple of years. But then, it will not be a dollar. US will not be the hegemon forever, and those things will change. So the question is whether the world and everybody will accept taking on another currency like it was in the past. British pound used to be the global currency reserve. French franc was a reserve currency at some point. I think Dutch currency was the reserve, and then we got to the point where for the last 80 years or so, it is the US dollar. But it works in cycles, and US dollar will not last forever. So, the question is whether the Western world will allow the next global currency to be another, coin controlled by one country, like let's say China. Will we be paying in yuans, or is it going to be in nobody's money, in Bitcoin?
So yeah, no, I absolutely I see what you're saying in terms of your belief in Bitcoin and where it's heading. When you have things that are happening in the market though, such as sort of Celsius and Terra and FTX and the collapses that have happened recently, do you see that affecting Bitcoin in any way other than obviously when the news drops and the price goes down that day?
Well, personally, I'm glad those things happen because that drops the price of Bitcoin, and I can, acquire it at a cheaper price. Secondly, I think that those cases educate people. First of all, with Terra, you get in Bitcoiners used to say Bitcoin, not crypto. So whenever there is a team behind any crypto token, whenever there is a founding team and a marketing team, and they have 10% of tokens allocation for marketing and whatnot, this is already it's a controlled security. This is not a commodity like Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't have a CEO. Bitcoin doesn't have a marketing budget. I would say the best marketing that Bitcoin gets is actually from Celsius, Terra, and those other companies that fail miserably. That some people try to get rich quick, and then we get to talk about Bitcoin, which is not affected at all. Yes, the price has dropped, but TikTok, next block, every 10 minutes, Bitcoin network produces another block life goes on and we move on. And Bitcoin is, nothing happened to it.
Do you think if any of the major participants, though, such as Kraken and Binance and etc., were to sort of go bankrupt, though, I mean, is that going to affect Bitcoin and the way it's viewed?
Well, I hope so. In a sense, anything centralized, anything that has a lot of behind the scenes activities, like FTX had, like Crypto.com might have, like Binance might have. At some point, whenever there is human factor involved and humans' greed involved, there will be mistakes because markets are unpredictable, and at some point, even the best with the best economic models, they will make a mistake that will not be fixable. I'm sure Sam Bankman-Fried is not a stupid guy. He he probably made some silly mistakes, and he was unlucky in a sense to get himself into the position he got himself. That cost people billions of dollars of money. And he will forever go in history as someone who basically made a massive fraud in crypto space. But again, I come back to the fact that these are the institutions that are controlled by individuals who make mistakes. Math doesn't make mistakes. Physics doesn't make mistakes. Bitcoin is an algorithm. It's a code. It's designed in a way that, like water, will continue flowing and it will not stop. So there isn't anyone who can manipulate it, who can say, okay, it's the most decentralized network out there.
And so that is the difference when you're talking about other cryptocurrencies in comparison to Bitcoin. Are you very much Bitcoin only, or is there other cryptocurrencies or anything that you're interested in as well?
I think I'm going to say that for the sake of this conversation, I am Bitcoin only, and I'll say that because I also had to go through a journey. So I had to go through my learnings. In the past I did hold some other tokens, and my early I got into Bitcoin in 2016-17. When it was there was a big bull run, and everybody was jumping on the train which was already speeding quite fast, and at that point I was ignorant to do my research at that point and to understand. Well, in my perception, Bitcoin was the first generation blockchain, the imperfect one. There'll be better one later on. That is a massive misconception. So in this sense, Bitcoin is unique. Bitcoin is the digital gold that is a commodity. And everything else is somehow controlled. In Ethereum, you've got single point of failure, Vitalik. You have a guy who can, make a tweet or make a decision that would affect the entire ecosystem. Or could affect entire ecosystem. In Cardano, you have Charles Hoskinson, great guy, but again, he's just a human. And any other token does have somebody that could be effectively making those mistakes. So that makes Bitcoin different, and the fact that it's so resilient to any attacks from the outside, it's just very, to me, it's very motivating to be only Bitcoin only.
That's a great answer, yeah, and I fully see where you're coming from with Bitcoin and your belief in it as well. And another thing that you're going to be believing in a lot is your new initiative, which we want to hear about as well. Can you just tell us what is Proof of Walk?
Sure. So it all started, as I mentioned earlier on, when I was going on a walk nearby, listening to some podcasts and some audiobooks around, about Bitcoin. And I really wanted to have conversations with other people and, have someone to to question that, to maybe have engaging creative conversation, to ping those ideas that I had in my mind of what we could do with that, with some other people. And I decided that we would create this thing called BitcoinWalk, where it's basically what's it called? It's a walking meetup for anyone interested in Bitcoin. And by anyone, I mean literally anyone, no matter what your at what stage of your journey with Bitcoin you are. If you're just interested, but you never held any, you never, you just want to learn more. You're more than welcome to come and walk with us and have a chat with us, and ask any questions that you have. And we've been doing that for nearly a year. It's going to be a year in April. And we decided to manifest our support to Bitcoin with a family photo. It's a little habit that I brought back from when I was studying in Japan. That wherever we went, our team, our class would have a family photo. So we do that with BitcoinWalk as well. We take a picture of all of us together, and this is our proof of walk. And we do it every Saturday, or Sat is also Satoshi, so that's the unit of micro unit of Bitcoin. And we want, why we do this is because we want to manifest that we are conscious of that, we are supporting that, we support adoption, we encourage more people to do that. And you don't have to be a rich person to support the idea. In fact, you don't really need to hold Bitcoin to come on the BitcoinWalk. If you like what you're hearing, if you like to to support the idea of sound money, of decentralization, of equality, and massive developments in that are happening in the unbanked world right now.
And if anybody wants to participate in the Bitcoin Walk, can they go about it? How would they do? Is there a website they can go to, or?
Yeah, so the website is bitcoinwalk.org. And we've got a very active Telegram group. We're quite active on Twitter as well. So all the links are there. It's quite easy to find us. Also, what we encourage people to do, we want to follow what Satoshi did, and I as a founder, I'd love to remove myself from being the founder. So it's a walk. Anybody can go for a walk on Saturday and talk about Bitcoin. They don't need me to be there. So ideally, what I like this to grow to become is an initiative that happens in different Bitcoin communities around the world, where people just meet up and go for a walk and have those conversations. That would be amazing. And it is my kind of little there's a little something for myself. I know if there will be other Bitcoin walks around the world, I would fly over there just to join them and just walk over there with them and just pretend that it's my first time. I just want to learn about Bitcoin.
Yeah, so pretend you've never done it before and infiltrate the other Bitcoin walking group. It sounds like a good idea.
I think one thing that I really noticed that really stands out with BitcoinWalk from any other meetups that I took part in is it is a networking event. It is a place where you come to meet people and have conversations with people, some of whom you might have met before on previous walks, some of whom are totally new to you. So what I notice is that because there is this one thing that unites us, that brings us together, that's Bitcoin, our conversations are instantly much easier to happen, to get started, to get kicked off. And it's fascinating how close we become just by this one thing that brings us together. So after one walk, when we have those couple of conversations, and we're going to be talking about different stuff, about politics, about philosophy, about technology, about what you do in life, what I do in life, and exchange those conversations. But the central point of everything is Bitcoin. And at any point, I find it really inspiring, because we have people who, like, I met people who are either completely new to Bitcoin, or I met people who are, in Bitcoin since 2013, when Bitcoin was like, $1, or a couple of bucks. And, these guys, like, their journey is like, everybody's journey is different. One of the most memorable persons that joined BitcoinWalk here in Edinburgh was a guy named Wabi, and he was a political refugee from Afghanistan. And he was probably the age of my dad. I could tell that, he wasn't very, like, IT literate, but he was, A, he couldn't work yet because he didn't have the right papers here, and B, he was desperate to be able to send money to his family in Afghanistan. And there aren't many ways you can do that. Bitcoin is one of them.
Yeah, I think, as you say, well, you said a lot, and with your with putting on this initiative, a sort of healthy initiative, you're bringing people together in a community to sort of talk about all kinds of different things in life, but having Bitcoin as the central point to sort of, that's the reason you're meeting up. But people do that, don't they? That, if whatever it might be, if it's sport, it might be football, or whatever it is, and it happens to be Bitcoin. And yeah, you are looking at the different sort of areas where Bitcoin can be really beneficial as well. As you mentioned, it can be beneficial for people who are unable to pay in other currencies. Obviously, that's all a bit under the radar, and a different way to look at it as well. Is there anything that you think you want to tell us before sort of finishing the podcast that would really like to sort of, like, as a message to the people regarding Bitcoin?
Yeah, I would say don't stop educating yourself. Learn about self-custody. Take your Bitcoin off exchange. Keep it in your wallet. Don't own zero Bitcoin. That's the best advice for the future, because this transformation will happen inevitably. And as my good friend Greg Foss used to say, gradually, then suddenly, and that becomes with the adoption of Bitcoin. Imagine that one day we wake up and you have some global macro event, such as, for example, Saudi Arabia deciding that, well, they are stepping away from trading oil in dollar, but they're not going to trade it in gold as Mr. Putin would like to. They will trade it in Bitcoin. What effect it will have to Bitcoin price and to Bitcoin adoption worldwide? This, is just one example of something that would massively increase adoption and exposure to, of Bitcoin to the business world. So one thing that I would leave people with is, it's just math. It's just math. It doesn't break. It's as simple as that.
Rivers, thank you very much for coming on. It's been absolutely brilliant speaking to you, and I wish you the best sort of striding into success with your Bitcoin walk. And please remember to go and follow along if you want to join on these Bitcoin walks as well, everyone. But once again, Rivers, I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for everybody who's been tuning in today. And please remember to go to Investro.com, where you can sign up for that newsletter to receive the latest financial information every week to your email. You can also find links to our social media as well. And you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify as well.